The late afternoon sun in Charleston felt heavier than usual as I wheeled my small suitcase up the familiar brick path. 2 weeks in New Orleans had been exactly what I needed, or so I thought. Days of jazz and powdered sugar. Nights of quiet hotel air conditioning and not a single argument in earshot. I'd come back ready to step into my own front door, put my bag down, and breathe in the scent of my home. But the sight waiting on my porch stopped me cold. 4 large black trash bags, cinched tight, sat in a haphazard pile against the white railing. The plastic shimmered faintly, the heat pressing their shapes into odd bulges. One bag had split along the seam, spilling a corner of its contents: books, a framed photo of my parents, and a manila envelope stamped Charleston County Register of Deeds. I crouched, my knees creaking, and pulled the envelope free. It was warm from the sun, the paper slightly warped. Inside, a property deed, mine except my name. Clarabelle Mendez had been neatly crossed out and replaced with Brennan Cole. The signature below wasn't mine, though the looping C tried to imitate it. The front door opened. Brennan stepped out, his hair damp from a shower, a ceramic coffee mug in his hand, like he had all the time in the world. His tone was calm, but there was a sharpness in it that sliced through the humid air. You're no longer part of this household. Clarabelle, time for you to move on. I stood there holding the forged deed, my fingers pressing into the edges until they bent. What is this? I asked. Though my voice didn't rise, it wasn't the kind of moment where shouting would help. Paperwork, he said with a smirk. Things are changing, not just eviction. This was something deeper, calculated. I slid the paper back into its envelope. Careful now, because whatever game Brennan was playing, this was a piece of it. My mind was already cataloging the irregularities in the stamp, the jaggedness of the signature, the sudden appearance of this document in my own trash bag. I set my suitcase upright, my hand still wrapped around the envelope, and stepped back off the porch. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the slow, rising heat of knowing exactly what I might be dealing with. I walked to the curb, pulling out my phone to call the one person I knew would open her door without hesitation. The weekend before my trip, I'd decided to host a family dinner in the backyard. It was one of those early summer evenings Charleston does so well, warm but not oppressive. The air carrying the faint, briny smell from the harbor. Spanish moss swayed lazily from the oaks overhead, catching the glow from the patio lights I'd strung along the fence. Marina had offered to bring dessert. Brennan handled the wine, and I'd prepared my best roasted chicken with rosemary from my garden. For a while, it felt like the old days' light chatter, the clink of glasses, and the easy rhythm of people who knew each other's habits. But under that ease, I could sense the current shifting. Brennan leaned back in his chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up, one arm draped across the backrest like he owned more than just his seat. You know, Clarabelle, he said, swirling his wine. This house has great bones, but it's begging for modernization. Open up the kitchen, knock out a wall or two, maybe put in those folding glass doors out to the yard. I smiled politely, cutting a slice of bread. It's been fine as it is for 40 years. That's the problem, he said with a chuckle. 40 years. Think about the resale value with the right upgrades. I've got a buddy works with a big developer in town, could make it happen fast. Marina shifted in her seat, her fork hovering over her plate, but said nothing. As the night wore on and the wine bottles emptied, Brennan's voice grew looser, his smile slower. He tapped the table with 2 fingers and said, You know, one signature, and this place could be mine in 60 days. It was wrapped in a laugh, tossed out like a playful jab. I laughed too, because what else could I do in the moment? but Marina's eyes darted to mine. A quick flash of something worry, maybe shame, before she looked away. I brushed it off at the time, telling myself it was just Brennan's way of puffing himself up after too much Cabernet. But now, standing on my porch with a forged deed in my hand, that night replayed in perfect clarity. And the thing about hindsight is, once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. I stepped toward the door, suitcase rolling behind me. But Brennan shifted, planting himself squarely in the frame. His stance wasn't aggressive in the way you'd see in a bar fight, but it had the same effect, an immovable wall between me and my own home. "You don't live here anymore," he said, the coffee mug still in his hand, like he had all the time in the world. "I've lived here longer than either of you," I replied, keeping my voice steady. From behind him, Marina appeared. Her hair was pulled back, and her expression was unreadable except for the way her eyes darted past me rather than meeting mine. She clutched her phone like it was an anchor, fingers white around it. "Mom," she began, her voice thin. It's better for everyone. We've talked about it. You need your own space." I asked, looking from her to Brennan. He didn't hesitate. "Marina and I both agree. This arrangement hasn't been healthy. You'll thank us later." The words slid off his tongue so easily I almost missed the way Marina's jaw tightened, the smallest tick betraying something she wasn't ready to say. I could feel the air thickening between us, that tense quiet that always comes before something breaks. Then my gaze drifted to the edge of the porch, where one of the trash bags had torn open further. A corner of my portable safe was sticking out. The steel scraped where it had been shoved around. I stepped closer and nudged it with my foot. It was light, too light. I bent down, popped it open, and found nothing but the faint smell of metal and dust. The safe had held more than just cash. There were family papers, letters from my father, the diamond earrings my mother left me. Gone. All of it. I straightened, the empty box in my hands, my eyes locking on Brennan. He didn't flinch, didn't even pretend to be surprised. "Go stay with one of your friends," he said. "We'll sort through the rest for you." I set the safe down slowly, the hollowness of it echoing in my chest, and pulled my suitcase back toward the street. My next call would not be to him or to Marina. By the time I reached the corner, I had already scrolled to Yvette's number. She picked up on the first ring, her voice a mixture of surprise and instant concern. 10 minutes later, I was in the back of her dusty blue sedan, my suitcase wedged between us. Yvette's Victorian was a block from the Battery, its wraparound porch shaded by magnolia trees. She ushered me inside like a hurricane was at my heels, guiding me straight to the upstairs guest room where crisp linens and a small vase of lilies were already waiting. "Drop your things," she said, "and come sit on the porch. You look like you need air and sweet tea." The tea was cold, the glass beaded with condensation. We sat in wicker chairs, the ceiling fan above moving lazily, stirring the heavy air. I told her everything. The bags on the porch, the deed with Brennan's name, the empty safe. She didn't interrupt, only leaned back with her brows drawn together, her journalist's mind no doubt already cataloging the details. When I finished, she set her glass down and said, "You know, this isn't new. It's uglier when it's family. But I've covered cases like this, family decisions. They called them when really it was financial abuse in disguise." Her voice took on that steady cadence she used to have on the radio. "Once, there was a widow in Mount Pleasant. Nephew got her to sign papers she didn't read. Sold the house right out from under her. She didn't even know until the moving truck showed up. Forged documents, shady notary work, every trick in the book. I felt the porch sway slightly under my feet, the weight of her words settling in. So you're saying, I'm saying Brennan's not inventing anything new, but if he's sloppy, there'll be a trail. There's always a trail. She reached over and patted my hand, her rings cool against my skin. We'll find it. The faint hum of the fan filled the space between us, but my mind was already elsewhere on a storage unit across town, where I kept the originals of everything that mattered. The next morning, Yvette drove us to her small storage unit on the edge of town. She kept it for things she didn't want in the household press archives, spare furniture, and, tucked behind a stack of banker's boxes, a fireproof folder I'd given her years ago. Inside were the things I'd told her to keep safe, just in case my original property deed, tax records, insurance papers. I slid the deed out and laid it across the folding table in the center of the unit, side by side. The difference between it and the one Brennan had left in the trash bag was impossible to miss. The notary stamp on my original was crisp, its embossed seal pressed cleanly into the page. The forged copy's stamp bled faintly at the edges, the seal more shallow, like it had been pressed with a dull coin. My signature steady on the original was an awkward imitation on the fake. The C too large, the Z in Mendez curling in a way I'd never write it. I didn't trust my eyes alone. So I made an appointment that afternoon with an attorney, Yvette knew Gideon Ward. His office was in a brick building near the courthouse, the kind of place that smelled faintly of paper and coffee. He took his time studying both documents, running a fingertip over the seals, holding them up to the light. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. This is a forgery, and not a particularly good one. The notary whose stamp is on this, he's already under investigation in 2 other fraud cases. The words landed with a mix of relief and dread. Proof was one thing. Using it without tipping off Brennan was another. We can build a strong case, Gideon said, sliding the forged deed back toward me. But if you want to win and keep control of the timing, we have to move quietly. No confrontations? No warnings? I nodded, tucking the papers back into the folder. I could keep quiet. I could wait. When I left his office, the air felt sharper, as if the first edge of a storm was forming somewhere out of sight. Gideon's plan was simple in theory, brutal in practice. We let him think he's safe. He said, "You watch. You document, and you say nothing to him or your daughter until we're ready to file. The more rope he has, the more he'll hang himself." I sat across from his desk, my hands folded over the fireproof folder, weighing the words. Every instinct in me wanted to march up my own porch steps, throw the forged deed in Brennan's face, and demand he leave. But Gideon's calm certainty made me pause. This wasn't just about winning, it was about winning so completely that there would be nothing for him to claw back. Still, the thought of him walking through my rooms, putting his feet on my furniture, pawing through the drawers where I'd kept my life, it twisted something deep in my chest. That house had been my anchor for decades. I'd taught in its kitchen, comforted Marina through heartbreaks in its living room, buried my husband's ashes beneath the magnolia in the yard. Now it was stage dressing for whatever role Brennan was playing back at Yvette's. I made myself a promise. I would keep my head down. No sudden moves, no hints. If Brennan thought I'd been shoved out quietly, so much the better. Let him post his little victory shots online. Let him brag. Every photograph, every careless word would be another nail in his own coffin. In the evenings, I'd sit on Yvette's porch with my notebook open, jotting dates, names, and scraps of overheard gossip from neighbors who'd called to check in, but couldn't resist telling me what they'd seen. Brennan's truck parked out front at odd hours. Deliveries of expensive patio furniture, Contractors coming and going with tool belts and plans. The silence became its own kind of discipline. Each day, a thread added to the net I was weaving. Gideon was right. Patience wasn't weakness. It was the slow tightening of a grip until the other person didn't realize they'd been caught until it was far too late. It started with a ping on my phone one evening, an acquaintance tagging me in a photo without realizing what she'd done. Brennan, grinning like a man who'd just conquered Rome, stood on my back deck. Only, it wasn't the deck I'd left behind. The old wood had been replaced with wide planks, a sleek glass railing wrapping around it, and a row of expensive lounge chairs lined up like soldiers. Curious. I typed his name into the search bar. His Instagram account was public, and the feed was a parade of self-congratulation before and after shots of the yard, videos of contractors hauling in marble slabs for the kitchen, and close-ups of high-end appliances tagged with their price. Every caption dripped with pride. I didn't like a single one. Instead, I began quietly saving each post and screen recording every video. In one clip, he bragged about smart investments while showing off the new landscaping native palms, stone walkways, an outdoor fire pit. The comments were full of friends asking when the big housewarming was. 3 nights later, over tea at Yvette's, a mutual acquaintance stopped by. Between sips, she let it slip that Brennan had been telling people he already had a buyer lined up. He said the sale's closing in 3 weeks, she added casually. As if we were talking about a weather forecast, I felt the air shift in my lungs. So that was his endgame: strip the place, cash out, and leave me with nothing but the echo of my own front door slamming shut. The next morning, I added the new intel to my growing file for Gideon's screenshots. Dates. The name of the potential buyer that our friend had overheard. I could almost hear Gideon's measured voice in my head. Perfect. Let him think the deal is untouchable. It was a strange sensation. Watching someone dig their own hole and knowing exactly how deep it would go. Every post Brennan made was another shovel of dirt over his own future. And I wasn't about to take that shovel away from him. Gideon didn't waste time. 2 mornings after I handed him the latest screenshots and the buyer's name, he called to say the paperwork was filed. A civil property claim to re-establish my ownership, paired with a criminal complaint for fraud and forgery. His voice carried that steady, precise tone that told me he'd thought through every angle. While I sat at Yvette's kitchen table, he explained the second move, a quiet call to the buyer's attorney. We're not accusing them of anything, he said. Just informing them there's a pending investigation into the property's title. Any competent attorney would tell their client to walk away by lunchtime. The first message came through our mutual acquaintance: the deal was off. No explanation given, just that the buyer had changed their mind. I could picture Brennan pacing in his kitchen, trying to figure out why his sure thing had evaporated overnight. The following day, the court notices went out, certified letters with my name in bold, delivered right to the doorstep he'd been so eager to claim. A neighbor texted me that she'd seen Brennan standing on the porch, tearing one envelope open, then the other. Not long after, Yvette's phone lit up with calls from numbers we didn't recognize. Lender lines, the kind that leave polite but insistent voicemails. Brennan must have been scrambling without the sale. Those remodeling costs were dead weight, and any loans he'd taken were coming due. That evening, I added the court notices to my growing binder, sliding each page into a clear sleeve. It wasn't just about the evidence anymore. It was about watching the pieces shift into place, the slow and irreversible tightening of the net. By the time I set the binder down, the house was quiet. Yvette had gone to bed, and outside the windows, the streetlights threw pale circles on the sidewalk. I stood there for a moment, letting the stillness settle in, knowing somewhere across town, Brennan's world was no longer the smooth, easy ride he'd imagined. I heard about it from a neighbor, first a shouting match that spilled onto the front porch, voices sharp enough to carry down the block. Marina had finally learned the whole truth. Not just about the deed with my name scrubbed off, but about the personal loan Brennan had taken out in her name, forging her signature the same way he'd done mine. Later, Marina called me herself, her voice raw. He signed my name. Mom. $10,000. I didn't even know until the bank called about a missed payment. I could hear the clatter of things being thrown into bags in the background. The low murmur of her kids, asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. "I'm leaving," she said flatly. "I can't. I won't let the kids watch this." By that night, she and the children were at a friend's place across town. Brennan left to stew in the shell of the house he'd tried to steal. Word traveled fast in Charleston. And by morning, I'd had 2 calls from acquaintances telling me they'd seen him looking haggard, his usual crisp shirts rumpled, hair uncombed. His credit lines had been frozen. Gideon had made sure of that, and without the sale to cover his debts. The remodeling bills had turned into anchors. Contractors wanted payment. The lender wanted payment. The loan he'd taken in Marina's name was now a formal complaint at the bank, which meant investigators sniffing around every piece of paper he'd touched. And then came the foreclosure notices. Bright, official, and impossible to ignore, taped right to the front door for the whole street to see. I imagined him pacing that kitchen, the same one where he'd probably smirked after tossing my safe into a trash bag. Now littered with unopened bills and final warnings. The fall had been slow at first, like watching a crack spread through glass. But now it was happening all at once. And though I hadn't seen him in weeks, I knew the next move was coming. When a man like Brennan runs out of options, he doesn't apologize, he looks for the nearest lifeline to grab. A year can change the shape of your life. Mine now fit inside a cozy brick storefront 2 blocks from the Beaufort waterfront. The bookstore-café smelled of espresso and old paper, the kind of place where regulars came for conversation as much as they did for coffee. After reclaiming my house and selling it, I'd poured the proceeds into this space, a business I'd once only daydreamed about while grading essays at my kitchen table. The shelves were lined with novels I loved, the corner tables worn in just enough to feel welcoming. Marina worked the counter 3 days a week, her hair tied up, laughter coming easier than it had in years. The kids often sat in the back after school, coloring or reading, their voices a soft hum beneath the cafe's soundtrack. On a Tuesday afternoon, I was helping a tourist choose a mystery novel when the door opened and the air shifted. Brennan stood there, thinner, drawn, eyes shadowed like he hadn't slept in days. His khakis were creased in the wrong places, his shirt one shade from threadbare. He didn't look around. He came straight to me. "Clarabelle, I need work," he said, voice low, almost swallowed by the clink of cups behind the counter. I didn't blink. "We've got a spot open," I replied. "Pay is minimum wage. You start with the bathrooms, or you walk out." For a moment, I thought he might take it. His eyes darted toward the back hallway, maybe picturing himself with a mop in hand, scrubbing tile while I ran my cafe without a glance in his direction. But pride won over desperation. His jaw tightened. Without a word, he turned and walked out, the little brass bell above the door marking his exit, as cleanly as a period at the end of a sentence. I turned back to the woman waiting for her book recommendation. "Now," I said, sliding the novel across the counter. "This one's got a twist you won't see coming. Some doors, once closed, aren't meant to be opened again, but they make excellent book covers.